She walked into the deadliest room in the castle, armed with nothing but a mop and a prayer. The guards were already betting on how long she'd survive. She walked straight up to the screaming monster that had broken every other nanny and told her she missed a spot. What happened next shocked the entire supernatural world. The Vampire King didn't kill the janitor. He stood between her and his own high council, eyes burning with ancient rage, and delivered a warning that made the room go silent. "Touch her, and I will burn this world to ash." 3 days earlier, the world had looked very different, though no less terrifying. Rain lashed against the cracked window of the employment agency, blurring the neon lights of the city below into streaks of angry red and bruised purple. The office smelled of wet wool, stale coffee, and the sharp, copper tang of desperation. Elena sat on the edge of the plastic chair, her spine rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. "The Spire?" the clerk asked, his eyebrows vanishing into his receding hairline. He looked at her application, then back at her, his expression shifting from boredom to pity. "Mrs. Vance, we have openings at the cannery. The hours are brutal, but the mortality rate is significantly lower." "I need the night shift," Elena said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart against her ribs. "And I need the hazard pay. My son's treatment isn't covered by standard insurance. The cannery doesn't pay enough for the specialists." The clerk sighed, tapping a pen against the desk. "Look, Elena. Can I call you Elena? The Obsidian Spire isn't just a building. It's the seat of the Vampire King. The staff turnover there isn't because people quit. It's because they vanish, or they break, or they simply stop coming home. You're applying for a janitorial position on the royal floor. Humans don't go to the royal floor." "I'm good at being invisible," Elena replied. "I clean. I keep my head down. I go home." "It's not the king you have to worry about," the clerk muttered, stamping a red seal onto her paperwork. "King Alaric is disciplined. It's the daughter, Princess Serafina. She's eaten 3 maids this month. Metaphorically speaking. Mostly. I've handled toddlers," Elena said, reaching for the paper. "They're all little monsters until they get a nap." The clerk handed her the sheet. It felt heavy, like a death warrant printed on bond paper. "Good luck, Mrs. Vance. Shifts start at sunset. Don't look them in the eye. Don't bleed. And for God's sake, if you hear crying, walk the other way." Elena took the paper. She didn't tell him that she had no choice. She didn't tell him about the letters from the clinic, the red ink on the bills piling up on her kitchen counter, or the way Leo coughed at night, a sound that rattled deep in his small chest like dry leaves. She just nodded, buttoned her thin coat, and walked out into the rain. The Obsidian Spire pierced the clouds, a needle of black stone that seemed to drink the light of the moon. Standing at the service entrance, Elena felt small. Not just physically small, but metaphysically insignificant. The air here was thinner, colder. It tasted of ozone and iron. She was processed by a silent guard with skin the color of marble and eyes that didn't blink. He gave her a gray uniform, a key card, and a bucket of cleaning supplies that smelled of industrial bleach and lavender. "4th floor," he rasped. "Do not go to the 5th unless summoned. Do not speak to the court. If you see the king, kneel." Elena nodded, changing quickly in the locker room. The uniform was stiff, scratching her neck. She checked her phone one last time. A text from her neighbor, Mrs. Gable. "Leo is asleep. He ate half his soup. Don't worry." Elena exhaled, a plume of white mist in the chilly air. For Leo. She worked for 4 hours in silence. The spire was beautiful in a terrifying way. The hallways were wide enough to drive a car through, lined with tapestries depicting battles that had happened before human history began. The floors were black mirror glass. Every footstep she took echoed, sounding like a gunshot in the silence. She scrubbed scuffs from the floor. She polished brass handles that were shaped like dragon claws. She dusted statues of forgotten gods. She was invisible. She was efficient. Then, the summons came. It wasn't a voice. It was a vibration in her pocket. The pager she'd been given buzzed violently. Level 50. Royal Quarters. Immediate sanitation required. Elena stared at the screen. Level 50. The penthouse. The king's home. She took the service elevator up. Her stomach twisted into knots. The elevator rose rapidly, ears popping as she ascended past the clouds. When the doors opened, the silence was different. Downstairs, the silence was empty. Here, the silence was heavy. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm, thick with static and unsaid words. The hallway was wrecked. Deep gouges marred the walls, as if a giant cat had sharpened its claws on the plaster. Expensive paintings hung askew. A chandelier lay in ruins on the carpet, crystals scattered like diamonds. "Hello," Elena whispered. No answer. She stepped over the remains of the chandelier and followed the trail of destruction. It led to a massive set of double doors. One was hanging off its hinges. Inside was a bedroom larger than Elena's entire apartment building. It was decorated in shades of midnight blue and silver, clearly a child's room, but one designed for a child of royalty. And it had been decimated. Books were shredded. A four-poster bed was overturned. And in the center of the room, surrounded by the debris of 1,000 tantrums, floated a girl. She looked no older than 7. Her hair was a tangled mane of black silk. Her dress was Victorian lace, torn at the hem. She was hovering in the air, her small fists clenched, tears of blood streaking down her pale cheeks. Elena froze. The instinct to run was primal. Every cell in her body screamed predator. The girl turned. Her eyes were black holes. "Get out," she shrieked. The sound wasn't human. It was a layered, distortion-heavy scream that rattled the windows. A shockwave of force knocked Elena's bucket over. Soapy water spilled across the pristine, albeit debris-covered, floor. Elena stumbled back, gripping her mop. She looked at the water. She looked at the girl. "I can't get out," Elena said, her voice surprising herself. "I just spilled the water. If I leave it, it'll ruin the wood." The girl stopped screaming. She hovered, blinking. "I will flay the skin from your bones." "That seems like an overreaction to a mop bucket," Elena muttered. She got down on her knees. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to stop. She pulled a rag from her apron. "Look, I'm just here to clean. You can keep destroying things if you want, but I have a job to do." The girl lowered herself a few inches. "You aren't screaming." "I'm internally screaming," Elena admitted, soaking up the water. "But I have a 5-year-old at home. Screaming gives me a headache." The girl touched the ground. Her bare feet made no sound. "You have a child? His name is Leo. He likes dinosaurs. Do you like dinosaurs?" Elena didn't look up. She focused on the grain of the wood, scrubbing a spot of soot. "I like dragons," the girl said haughtily. "My father killed one." "That's nice," Elena said. "Messy though, I bet. Dragons have a lot of blood." The girl took a step closer. The air in the room grew colder, frost patterning on the windows. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" The last nanny jumped out the window. Elena paused. She sat back on her heels and looked at the girl, really looked at her. Beneath the terrifying aura, beneath the blood tears and the ancient power, she saw the slumped shoulders, the red-rimmed eyes, the exhaustion. "Because you're just a kid," Elena said quietly. "A kid who's clearly having a really bad night." "I am 300 years old," the girl shouted, stomping her foot. A vase on a nearby shelf exploded. Elena didn't flinch. "And you're acting like you're 3. Now, are you going to help me pick up this glass, or are you going to float around being grumpy?" That was the moment the air changed. The heavy pressure at the back of the room shifted. A shadow detached itself from the far corner. "She has a point, Serafina," a voice said. It was a voice like crushed velvet and deep earth. Low, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. Elena scrambled to her feet, clutching her wet rag to her chest. King Alaric stepped into the light. He was tall, impossibly so, looming over the room like a monolith. He wore a simple black shirt and trousers, but he wore them with the bearing of someone who had worn heavy armor for centuries. His hair was silver white, tied back loosely. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and pale skin, beautiful and severe. But his eyes were the color of amber trapped in ice. He looked at Elena. It felt like being scanned by an X-ray. He saw the frayed cuffs of her uniform. He saw the cheap shoes. He saw the terror in her pulse, fluttering like a trapped bird in her neck. "You," he said, "are still alive." Yes, Your Majesty," Elena stammered, remembering to lower her eyes. "I apologize for the disturbance. I was just cleaning the spill." Alaric moved past her, his movement fluid, unnatural. He stopped in front of his daughter. Serafina crossed her arms, looking defiant but small next to him. "You broke the Ming vase," Alaric noted, his tone devoid of anger, just weary. "It was ugly," Serafina snapped. "It was a gift from the Emperor of the East," Alaric replied. He turned back to Elena. "What is your name?" "Elena. Elena Vance, sir." "Your Majesty." "Elena." He tasted the name. Most humans faint when Serafina taps into the void. "You asked her to pick up glass." "She was floating barefoot," Elena said, defensiveness creeping into her tone. "It's a safety hazard." Alaric stared at her for a long, stretching moment. The silence was absolute. Elena held her breath, wondering if this was how she died. Wondering who would feed Leo his medicine tomorrow. "Leave us," Alaric said to Elena. Elena nodded hurriedly, grabbing her bucket. She backed out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. As the doors closed, she heard Alaric speak to his daughter. "She didn't run, Sarah. That's new." The next night, Elena tried to quit. She called the agency, but no one picked up. She sat in her small kitchen, counting the bills again. She needed the money. She needed it so badly it felt like a physical weight on her chest. So, she went back. The guard at the gate didn't send her to the locker room. "You are to report to the steward's office immediately," he said. Elena swallowed hard. "This is it. I'm fired. Or executed." The steward was a thin, bird-like vampire named Corvus. He sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than Elena's life earnings. He pushed a contract toward her. "The king has requested your transfer," Corvus said, his nose wrinkling as if he smelled something unpleasant. "Transfer?" Elena asked. "To the kitchens? To the royal nursery?" Corvus looked like the words tasted like lemons. "His Majesty requires a custodian for the princess. The previous staff have proven fragile." Elena stared at the paper. The salary figure made her dizzy. It was enough to pay off the debts. Enough for the best doctors for Leo. Enough to move out of the neighborhood where gunshots were the nightly lullaby. "I'm a janitor," Elena whispered. "Not a nanny." "The job description is environmental and behavioral maintenance," Corvus drawled. "Essentially, keep the princess from destroying the structural integrity of the tower." "Can you do that?" Elena thought of the little girl floating in the wreckage of her room. She thought of the loneliness in those black eyes. "I can try," Elena said. She signed the paper. The transition was not smooth. The court was a viper pit. Vampires of the High Council watched her with hungry, disdainful eyes as she walked the halls. She was a mouse in a den of lions, kept alive only by the confusing patronage of the king. Her first week was a war of attrition. Serafina tested her. She threw books. She summoned shadows to hide Elena's keys. She heated the doorknobs until they burned Elena's hands. But Elena didn't break. When Serafina threw a book, Elena sat down and read the page it opened to. When the keys vanished, Elena started telling a story about a key that wanted to go on an adventure. When the doorknob burned her, she ran her hand under cold water, wrapped it, and returned to the room without a word of complaint. She brought structure. Vampires, she realized, were timeless. They drifted. Children needed anchors. Bedtime, Elena announced one Tuesday, 3 weeks in. Serafina was hanging upside down from the ceiling like a bat. "I don't sleep." "You rest," Elena corrected. "Even monsters need to recharge." "Come down." "I brought a book." "I hate books," Serafina lied. "This one is about a spider who eats people," Elena said casually, opening the battered copy of a folklore anthology she'd brought from home. Serafina dropped from the ceiling, landing silently. She crept closer. "Does the spider win?" "You have to get in bed to find out." It was a small victory. A tiny, fragile thread of trust. Alaric watched it all. He didn't intervene. He was a distant figure, a shadow passing in the halls. Sometimes Elena would feel eyes on her and turn to see him standing on a balcony, watching her walk across the courtyard. He never smiled. He never spoke more than necessary. But he didn't fire her. Then came the catalyst. It was a month into her employment. Elena was tired. Leo had a bad night, coughing until dawn, and she had come to work running on adrenaline and caffeine. She was in the nursery, folding Serafina's clothes, tiny, velvet things that cost more than a car. Serafina was practicing her telekinesis, lifting blocks and spinning them. The door burst open. It wasn't Alaric. It was a man Elena hadn't met. He was beautiful in the way a shark is beautiful, sleek, gray-skinned, with hair like spun silver. He wore robes of crimson and gold. Lord Valerius. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at Serafina. "The council is waiting," Princess Valerius said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your assessment cannot be delayed any longer." Serafina went rigid. The blocks fell to the floor with a clatter. "I don't want to go." "It is not a matter of want," Valerius sneered. He took a step forward. "You are the heir. If you cannot control your power, you are a liability. Your father's reign is already weak. Do not make it worse." The air pressure dropped. Serafina began to shake. Shadows bled from the corners of the room, curling around her ankles. "I said no," Serafina screamed. A wave of force blasted outward. Valerius raised a hand, deflecting the magic with a negligent flick of his wrist. He laughed. Pathetic. Uncontrolled. Dangerous. He moved to grab her arm. Elena didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She didn't remember that she was a fragile bag of blood and bones standing between two apex predators. She dropped the laundry and stepped in front of Serafina. "She said no," Elena said. Her voice was shaking, but she stood her ground. She spread her arms, shielding the girl with her body. Valerius stopped. He looked at Elena as if she were a talking cockroach. "Move, human, or I will snap your spine." "She is a child," Elena said, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. "And she is distressed." "You don't grab a distressed child. You back off." "I am a lord of the High Council," Valerius hissed, his fangs lengthening. "And you're nothing." He reached out. His hand was cold, his grip like iron. He grabbed Elena's shoulder, his claws digging into her flesh. Pain flared, hot and sharp. "Father!" Serafina shrieked. The shadows in the room didn't just darken, they solidified. The temperature plummeted to absolute zero. Frost exploded across the windows. Valerius froze. He let go of Elena and stumbled back, fear flashing in his eyes. Standing in the doorway was Alaric. But it wasn't the tired, distant king Elena was used to. This was the monster. The ancient. Darkness poured off him like smoke. His eyes were burning gold. "You touched her," Alaric said. The voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly soft. "You touched my staff." She was interfering, Valerius stammered, bowing low. "The human, she dared to block me." Alaric moved. It was too fast to see. One moment he was at the door, the next he was between Elena and Valerius. He didn't look at Elena. He stared down at the counselor. "She is under my protection," Alaric said. "This woman is the first person in 5 years who has managed to get my daughter to eat her dinner. If you touch her again, Valerius, I will forget the peace treaty. I will forget the council laws. And I will tear your head from your shoulders in front of the entire court." Valerius paled. "My king. I did not know. Get out." Valerius fled. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena clutched her shoulder. Blood was seeping through her gray uniform. Alaric turned. The darkness receded, pulled back into him with a visible effort. He looked at Elena. His gaze dropped to the blood on her shoulder. "You are injured," he said. "It's fine," Elena managed, though the room was spinning. "Just a scratch." "He has claws that carry venom," Serafina whispered. She was peeking out from behind Elena's legs, her eyes wide. "Is she going to die?" "No," Alaric said firmly. He stepped closer to Elena. For the first time, he entered her personal space. He smelled of winter air and old parchment. "Let me see." Elena hesitated, then lowered her hand. Alaric reached out. His fingers were cool, but gentle. He touched the torn fabric. Why? He asked. He looked into her eyes. You are mortal. He could have killed you instantly. Why did you step in front of her? Elena looked down at Serafina, who was clutching the hem of her pants. Because she was scared, Elena whispered. And no one should have to be scared alone. Alaric stared at her. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the marble mask. He looked from Elena to his daughter, who was clinging to this human woman as if she were a lifeline. Come, Alaric said, his voice rough. We must treat the wound. And then, we must talk. The infirmary was less a hospital and more a laboratory. Glass vials bubbled with brightly colored liquids. A skeletal doctor patched Elena up, muttering about fragile human dermis. The venom, luckily, was mild, intended to cause pain, not death. Alaric stayed. He stood by the window, watching the city lights far below. When the doctor finished and left, Alaric turned. You have a son, he stated. It wasn't a question. Elena stiffened. Yes. You work here to pay for his medicine. Pulmonary issues. How do you know that? I am the king, Alaric said simply. I know everyone who enters my domain. I checked your background the night I hired you. He walked over to the bed where she sat. He looked tired again. Valerius will not forgive this humiliation. You have made an enemy. I'm a janitor, Elena said with a bitter laugh. I didn't think I rated high enough to have enemies. You are not just a janitor anymore, Alaric said. You are the nanny. And tonight, you proved you are the only one loyal enough to risk your life for my heir. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, heavy pouch. He placed it on the table. This is not payment, he said. This is insurance. For the boy. Take it. Elena opened the pouch. Inside were gold coins. Ancient, heavy gold. Enough to buy her apartment building. I can't take this, she whispered. Take it, Alaric commanded. If something happens to you because of my court, the boy must be provided for. He paused, his hand lingering near hers on the table. I cannot protect you from everything, Elena. My power is complicated. The council thinks I am weak because I do not rule with fear anymore. They think Serafina is a monster because she cannot control her gift. She's not a monster, Elena said fiercely. She's lonely. She has no mother, and her father is a statue who watches from balconies. Alaric recoiled slightly, as if she'd slapped him. His eyes narrowed. You speak boldly for someone who just nearly died. I'm tired, Elena said, the adrenaline crashing. And I'm telling the truth. She needs a parent, Alaric. Not a king. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. The air in the room stilled. Alaric looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as a servant, not as a fleeting human life, but as an equal. I do not remember how, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It has been 600 years since I was anything but a king. Her mother. She was the one who knew how to love. Well, Elena said, standing up, wincing slightly at the pain in her shoulder. It's like riding a bike. Or cleaning up glass. You just have to start. Alaric watched her. A strange expression crossed his face, something soft, something that looked almost like hope. Go home, Elena, he said softly. Be with your son. But come back. Please. I'll be back, she promised. She walked out of the spire that night with gold in her pocket and a target on her back. 6 months passed. The spire changed. Not structurally, it was still a terrifying monolith of black stone, but the atmosphere shifted. The royal suite was no longer a disaster zone. It had toys. It had drawings taped to the expensive silk wallpaper, drawings of dragons and stick-figure people. Elena brought Leo to the castle on weekends. It was a calculated risk, but Serafina begged for it. The first meeting had been tense. Leo, frail and small, clutching a toy dinosaur. Serafina, floating 2 inches off the ground, vibrating with restrained energy. Is he edible? Serafina had asked. No. Elena and Alaric shouted in unison. Then, Leo had held out his dinosaur. This is Rex. He eats bad guys. Serafina had landed. She took the dinosaur. I can make him fly. And she did. She levitated the plastic toy. Leo laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the cold stone walls. Alaric stood on the balcony, watching them. Elena stood beside him. They were closer now. Over the months, the physical distance between them had shrunk. He would stand near her while she read to the children. He would walk her to the gate at night. "He looks better," Alaric observed. "The new treatments are working," Elena said. "Thank you. You saved my daughter," Alaric replied. "It is a fair trade." He turned to her. The wind whipped his silver hair. "The winter solstice ball is next week." "I know," Elena said. "I've been coordinating with the cleaning crews. It's a nightmare. I want you to attend." Elena laughed. "As what?" "The head of sanitation." "As my guest?" Elena froze. She looked up at him. His golden eyes were serious. "Alaric." "I can't." "The council." "Valerius." "Valerius is plotting," Alaric said darkly. "He gathers whispers. He says I've been bewitched by a human witch. He says Serafina is being corrupted by mortal weakness. And bringing me to the ball proves him right," Elena argued. "No," Alaric said. He stepped closer. He took her hand, her rough, calloused hand, in his pale, elegant ones. His skin was cool, but it burned where he touched her. "Bringing you shows them that I do not care. It shows them that I choose my family. And you are part of this family now, Elena." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The look in his eyes was intense, terrifying, and overwhelmingly tender. "I don't have a dress," she whispered, a weak deflection. Alaric smiled. It was a rare, crooked thing that transformed his face. "I am a king, Elena. I can find a dress." The box arrived 3 hours before the ball. It was made of black matte cardboard, tied with a ribbon of silver silk that felt like running water against her fingers. There was no card. There didn't need to be. Elena sat on the edge of her sagging mattress in her small apartment, the contrast between the box and her surroundings almost comical. The peeling beige wallpaper, the stack of unpaid bills on the nightstand, and this object of impossible luxury. She opened it. The dress was the color of a storm cloud right before the lightning strikes, a deep, charcoal gray that shifted to midnight blue in the light. It wasn't the frilly, puffed-sleeve confection of a fairy tale princess. It was sleek, architectural, and terrifyingly elegant. The fabric was heavy velvet, cut to drape off the shoulders and pull on the floor. "Mom?" Leo stood in the doorway, clutching Rex the dinosaur. He was wearing his pajamas with the feet. "Are you going to the castle?" Elena looked up, her eyes stinging. "Yes, baby. Just for a little while. Mrs. Gable is coming over to watch movies with you." "Is the king going to be there?" "Yes." "Is he a good monster or a bad monster?" Elena ran her hand over the velvet. She thought of the way Alaric had looked at her in the infirmary, the terrified father beneath the ancient king. She thought of the way he had decimated Valerius's pride to protect a janitor. "He's a lonely monster, Leo," she said softly. "And I think those are the ones who need friends the most." The Great Hall of the Obsidian Spire was designed to make humans feel insignificant. The ceiling was lost in shadows, supported by pillars thick enough to hold up the sky. The floor was a single sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting the thousands of floating candles that hovered in the air like a galaxy of trapped stars. The air was freezing. Vampires didn't feel the cold, but the humans, the blood dolls, the servants, the few favored pets invited to the gala shivered in their finery. Elena did not shiver. The dress Alaric had sent was lined with something warm, a subtle enchantment woven into the seams that kept the chill at bay. It was a secret comfort, a private kindness in a public arena. She stood at the top of the staircase. The herald, a skeleton with a voice like grinding stones, banged his staff. "Presenting," the herald intoned, pausing as he read the simple card, "Elena Vance." No title, no lineage, just a name. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing against her eardrums. 300 faces turned upward. Faces of marble perfection, eyes of crimson and gold and void black. They looked at her with hunger, with disdain, with curiosity. She was a lamb walking into a wolf den, wearing a wolf's skin. "Chin up," she told herself. "You handle biohazard waste and tantrums that break the sound barrier. You can handle a party." She began to descend. Her heels clicked on the stone. Click, Click. Click. Lord Valerius stood near the base of the stairs, a glass of dark red liquid in his hand. His eyes narrowed as she approached. He looked ready to speak, ready to cut her down with a word. But before he could open his mouth, the crowd parted. They didn't move out of respect, they moved out of instinctual self-preservation. A path cleared through the center of the hall, and at the end of it stood Alaric. He wore formal regalia, a high-collared coat of black brocade with silver threading, a cape that seemed to be made of shadows. He looked ancient. He looked lethal. And he was looking only at her. He walked toward the stairs. He didn't rush, but his stride devoured the distance. He met her at the bottom step. "You came," he said. His voice was low, meant only for her, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall, she knew the vampires with their heightened senses heard every syllable. "I promised," Elena said. She felt breathless, and it wasn't from the corset. Alaric offered his hand. He wasn't wearing gloves. "Then allow me to keep mine." He led her onto the floor. The orchestra, invisible in the shadows of the balcony, began to play. It was a waltz, but slower, deeper, a melody that sounded like a heartbeat. Alaric placed a hand on her waist. The contact burned through the velvet. Elena placed her hand on his shoulder. He was solid, unyielding stone, yet he moved with the grace of smoke. "They are staring," Elena whispered, keeping her eyes locked on his cravat. "Let them," Alaric replied. "For 500 years, they have stared at me waiting for weakness. Tonight, let them stare at my strength." Elena looked up surprised. "I'm your strength. You are the only thing in this room that is real," Alaric said. His amber eyes searched hers. "Everything else is politics and hunger. You are just Elena." He spun her. The room blurred. For a moment, the terrifying court, the danger, the bills on the counter, it all vanished. There was just the music, the warmth of his hand, and the scent of him, winter air and old books. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she admitted. "Then do not wake up," Alaric murmured. He leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. The intimacy of the gesture sent a shockwave through the room. She could hear the gasps. "Stay with me, Elena. Not just for the job. Not just for the boy. Stay because I do not think I can go back to the silence." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Internal conflict. This was dangerous. He was immortal. She was a blip in time. He drank blood, she cleaned it up. But looking at him, seeing the raw, naked longing in a face that hadn't shown emotion in centuries, she felt her own walls crumbling. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. The spell broke when the music stopped. The applause was polite, scattered. Alaric had to attend to the ambassadors from the werewolf clans, leaving Elena alone near the buffet table, which, thankfully, held normal food alongside the crystal decanters of blood. She grabbed a tart, needing the sugar to stop her hands from shaking. "A bold performance," a voice sneered. Elena turned. Lord Valerius loomed over her. Up close, he smelled of copper and rot, masked by heavy perfume. "Lord Valerius," Elena said, wiping crumbs from her lip. "I assume you're enjoying the party." "I am enjoying the farce," Valerius hissed. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Do you think a new dress changes what you are?" "You are prey, Mrs. Vance. You are a mayfly playing house with dragons. He will tire of you. Or you will bleed. And when you are gone, I will still be here." Elena put the tart down. She wiped her hands on a napkin. She looked at the vampire lord, remembering the fear she felt in the nursery. It was still there, but it was different now. It was managed. "You know," Elena said conversationally, "I used to be afraid of the dark. Then I realized the dark is just where you put the things you haven't cleaned yet." Valerius blinked. "Excuse me? You think you're scary because you're old and you have teeth," Elena said, stepping toward him. "But I've seen you, Valerius. I saw you cower when Alaric raised his voice. I see you now, trying to bully the help because you're terrified of the king. You're not a dragon. You're a petty middle manager with a god complex." Valerius's face contorted. His eyes flashed red. "You insolent. Is there a problem?" The voice came from behind Valerius. It wasn't Alaric. It was Corvus, the king's steward. He looked bored, but his hand rested on the hilt of a silver dagger at his belt. "No problem," Elena said brightly. "Lord Valerius was just leaving. He has some boots to lick, I believe." Valerius looked from Corvus to Elena. He sneered, a sound like tearing fabric. "Enjoy your night, Janitor. The dawn comes for us all." He spun on his heel and vanished into the crowd. Corvus looked at Elena. A small, dry smile touched his lips. "Middle manager? That was reckless." "It felt good," Elena admitted, letting out a breath she'd been holding. "Be careful," Corvus warned, his tone dropping. "Valerius is a coward, yes. But cowards are the ones who stab you in the back. He has been meeting with the outer clans. There are whispers, Elena. Whispers of a coup." "Why are you telling me?" "Because," Corvus said, glancing at the king across the room, "Alaric has not smiled in 3 centuries. Until you. If you die, he will burn this world to ash. And I am quite fond of the world." Later, escaping the suffocating press of the ballroom, Elena wandered onto the terrace. The air was crisp, biting at her exposed skin, but the heat of the ballroom still flushed her cheeks. She needed to check on Serafina. The princess wasn't allowed at the ball, but Elena knew the girl was likely awake, listening to the music from her tower. Elena took the service stairs, old habits died hard, up to the royal wing. The hallway was quiet, the guards nodding to her as she passed. They respected her now. She was the woman who tamed the storm. She reached the nursery door and cracked it open. Serafina was asleep, sprawled across her bed with Rex the dinosaur tucked under her arm. Elena smiled, her heart squeezing. She pulled the blanket up, smoothing the hair from the girl's forehead. "Sweet dreams, little dragon," she whispered. She turned to leave, but a sound stopped her. It wasn't in the nursery. It was coming from the king's study down the hall. The study was supposed to be locked. Alaric was downstairs. Elena crept down the hallway. The door to the study was ajar, just a sliver. A soft, pulsating blue light spilled from the crack. She knew she should run. She knew she should call the guards. But the words of Corvus echoed in her mind. "Cowards are the ones who stab you in the back." She peered through the crack. 2 figures stood inside. One was Valerius. The other was a figure cloaked in heavy gray robes, their face hidden. They were standing over Alaric's desk, where a large map of the spire's ley lines was spread out. "The node is exposed," the cloaked figure rasped. The voice was feminine, but distorted, as if speaking through water. "And the king?" Valerius asked. Distracted. "The human has done her job well. He is soft. He leaves the void gate unguarded." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. The void gate. It was a myth, the source of the spire's power, a Terran reality that Alaric kept sealed with his own bloodline's magic. "Tonight then," Valerius said. He placed a small, intricate metal pyramid on the map. "When the moon reaches its zenith, we break the seal. The void will consume the court, and from the ashes, we will rise." "And the girl?" "The girl is the key," Valerius said, his voice dripping with malice. "Her power is raw. We will use her to widen the tear. She will be the battery that powers our new empire." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Serafina." She stepped back, her heel catching on the runner carpet. Thump. The voices inside stopped instantly. "What was that?" Valerius hissed. Elena turned and ran. She didn't run like a lady in a gown. She hiked the velvet up to her knees and sprinted, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone. She'd kicked her heels off earlier. "Get her!" Valerius roared. The study door burst open. A blast of kinetic energy hit Elena in the back, throwing her forward. She crashed into the wall, the wind knocked out of her. She scrambled up, gasping. Shadows were stretching down the hall, morphing into claws. She couldn't go to the ballroom. Too far. The elevators were too slow. She scrambled toward the service chute, a laundry drop that led to the basement. It was desperate. It was stupid. She threw herself into the chute just as a bolt of green fire scorched the spot where she had been standing. She tumbled down into the darkness, sliding through slick metal, screaming silently as she fell past floor after floor. She landed hard in a pile of dirty linens in the sub-basement, 300 feet below. She groaned, rolling out of the pile. Her beautiful dress was torn. Her shoulder, the one Valerius had injured before, throbbed. She had to warn Alaric. But she was in the bowels of the castle, and the enemy knew she was here. The basement was a labyrinth of pipes and steam. Elena limped through the shadows, her mind racing. Moon zenith. That was in less than an hour. She patted her pocket for her phone. Gone. Lost in the fall. She grabbed a heavy iron pipe from a pile of scrap. Protagonist agency. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a mage. She was a janitor. She knew the building better than anyone. Think, Elena, she whispered to herself. The Void Gate. Where is it? Legends said it was in the roots of the mountain. Below the basement. If she went up to warn Alaric, she might be intercepted. If she went down, she might be able to stop them. Or at least sabotage them. She heard footsteps. Heavy boots. Find the human, Valerius's voice echoed through the pipes. She cannot reach the king. Elena hid behind a boiler. She watched as 3 guards, traitors, wearing armbands of silver, swept the room. She saw the ventilation shaft above the boiler. It was small. Tight. She climbed. The metal burned her hands. She squeezed herself into the ductwork, dragging her dress and the iron pipe. She crawled through the darkness, the dust choking her. She knew where this vent led. It went to the lower catacombs. She moved as fast as she could, her knees bruising against the metal. Below her, she could hear the preparations. A low chanting was vibrating through the walls. She reached a grate and looked down. She was looking into a cavern that shouldn't exist. It was vast, lit by glowing purple crystals. In the center stood a massive archway of bone and obsidian. The air shimmered inside it, the void. Valerius was there. And the cloaked woman. And Elena clamped a hand over her mouth. They had Seraphina. The girl was unconscious, floating in a bubble of stasis magic, hovering right in front of the archway. Begin the ritual, Valerius commanded. Elena looked at her pipe. She looked at the cavern. There were a dozen armed guards. She couldn't fight them. But she saw something else. The crystals lighting the room were connected by silver chains, conduits. And directly above the main conduit, the one feeding power to the archway, was a massive, rusted water main. Janitorial knowledge. That pipe was the main drainage for the entire spire. It was under immense pressure. Elena adjusted her grip on the iron bar. She wasn't going to fight them. She was going to do some plumbing. She kicked the grate out. It fell with a clang, drawing every eye upward. Hey! Elena shouted, her voice echoing off the cavern walls. Valerius looked up, his eyes widening. You forgot the first rule of building maintenance. Elena yelled, swinging the pipe with all her strength against the rusted valve of the water main next to her. Check the pressure valves. Clang. The metal groaned. A hiss of steam. Stop her. Valerius screamed. Elena swung again. Clang. The valve sheared off. It wasn't a leak. It was an explosion. A jet of pressurized water, thick with sludge and centuries of sediment, blasted out with the force of a freight train. It hit the conduit chain. The silver chain snapped. The crystals shattered. The magical feedback was instantaneous. A shockwave of blue light exploded outward, knocking the guards off their feet. The stasis bubble around Seraphina flickered and failed. The girl dropped. Seraphina! Elena screamed. She jumped. It was a suicidal drop, 20 feet to the stone floor. But she didn't hit the floor. She was caught in midair by a shadow. Not a scary shadow. A familiar one. She looked up. Seraphina was awake. Her eyes were glowing with terrifying power, but her small hand was reaching out, suspending Elena in a cradle of telekinetic force. You smell like garbage, Seraphina said, her voice trembling but fierce. I had a rough commute, Elena gasped as Seraphina lowered them both to a ledge high above the chaos. Below them, the cavern was flooding. Valerius was screaming orders, trying to stabilize the ritual, but the water was short-circuiting the magic. Arcs of lightning danced across the water. We have to go, Elena said, grabbing Seraphina's hand. We have to find your father. He's coming, Serafina said, looking at the ceiling. I can feel him. He is very angry. High above, in the ballroom, the floor exploded. Not from a bomb, but from sheer force. King Alaric dropped through the crater in the floor, descending into the basement levels like a meteor. He had felt Serafina's fear. He had felt Elena's panic. He landed in the flooded cavern, the water hissing as it touched his aura. He stood amidst the chaos, his coat billowing. He saw Valerius. He saw the broken ritual. He saw the flooding cavern. And then he looked up and saw Elena and Serafina huddled on a high ledge, wet, dirty, and alive. The look on Alaric's face was not human. It was the face of a god of war. Valerius, Alaric said. The name was a curse. Valerius, standing knee-deep in rising sludge, looked at the king. He realized, in that moment, that his coup had failed. He realized that he had made a grave miscalculation. He drew a jagged, black blade. If I cannot have the throne, he screamed, I will take your heart. He didn't charge Alaric. He threw the blade. Not at the king. At Elena. The blade spun through the air, humming with void magic. It was too fast. Alaric was too far away. Serafina was exhausted from the catch. Elena saw it coming. She didn't have time to move. She just turned, shielding Serafina with her body for the second time. This is it, she thought. At least Leo is safe. The blade struck. But it didn't hit flesh. It hit a wall of solid ice. Alaric hadn't moved his body. He had thrown his power. A glacier of black ice erupted from the ground in front of Elena, catching the blade inches from her spine. The ice shattered the sword. Alaric turned back to Valerius. He raised one hand. Run, Alaric whispered. Valerius turned to flee, but the shadows in the room came alive. They wrapped around his ankles, dragging him down into the murky water. No, no. Alaric closed his fist. The shadows surged. Valerius was pulled under. Silence fell, broken only by the rushing water. Alaric leaped up to the ledge. He didn't speak. He gathered both of them, Elena and Serafina, into his arms. He was shaking. I have you, he murmured into Elena's wet, dirty hair. I have you. Elena sagged against him, the adrenaline finally leaving her body. The dress, she mumbled deliriously. I ruined the dress. Alaric let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I will buy you 1,000 dresses. I will buy you the factory that makes them. Just breathe. The aftermath was a blur. The council was purged. The traitors were rounded up. Elena sat in the royal suite, wrapped in a blanket. Her shoulder was bandaged again. Leo had been brought to the castle. Alaric insisted it was the safest place. He was asleep in Serafina's bed, the vampire princess curling up at the foot of the mattress like a guard dog. Alaric stood by the fireplace. He had discarded his ruined coat. He looked weary, ancient. You saved us, he said, staring into the flames. Again. I broke a water main, Elena corrected. It wasn't exactly heroic. You jumped into the dark, Alaric turned to her. You faced a lord of the council with a pipe. Do not diminish this, Elena. He walked over to her and knelt. It was a position of submission, of reverence. He took her hands. The council is demanding I take a queen, he said quietly. To stabilize the throne. To prevent another uprising. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She pulled her hands back slightly. Oh. I understand. You have to do what's right for the kingdom. They have suggested the Duchess of the Western clans. Or the Sorceress of the High Tower. They sound qualified, Elena said, her voice sounding hollow. They are, Alaric agreed. But they have a fatal flaw. What's that? They are not you. Alaric looked up at her. I do not want a political alliance, Elena. I want the woman who tells my daughter bedtime stories about spiders. I want the woman who cleans up glass without shaking. I want the woman who makes me remember what it feels like to be alive. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a key. It was an old iron key. This opens the private gardens, he said. The ones no one has entered in 500 years. It is my sanctuary. I want you to have it. Elena took the key. It was warm from his skin. Is this a proposal? She asked, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It is a beginning," Alaric said. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "If you will have a monster." Elena closed her eyes, breathing him in. "I told Leo you were a lonely monster. I think we can fix that part." She leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a fireworks kiss. It was a slow, steady burn. It tasted of survival, of winter turning into spring. It was the promise of a story that was just beginning. The spire was still black, still imposing, but the windows were open. In the courtyard, a garden had been planted. Not night-blooming poisonous flowers, but sunflowers. Bright, yellow, ridiculous sunflowers. Elena sat on a bench, watching. Leo was running across the grass, chasing a ball. Running after him, laughing in the sunlight, yes, sunlight, thanks to a heavy layer of enchantment cream, was Serafina. She wasn't floating. She was running. And standing on the balcony above, watching them with a look of profound peace, was Alaric. He caught Elena's eye. He smiled. Elena smiled back. She checked her watch. It was almost time for the council meeting. She had to go. As the official advisor on human relations and sanitation, she had a busy schedule. She stood up, brushing dirt from her pants. She walked toward the castle, toward her family. The monster had found his heart. The princess had found her childhood. And the janitor? She had found a mess worth keeping. The sun did not rise over the obsidian spire, it merely turned the surrounding gray clouds a lighter shade of bruised purple. In the royal wing, the silence was absolute, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped. Elena stood in the bathroom of the master suite, a room she had cleaned a dozen times but never used. She stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror. Her face was smeared with soot and dried subterranean sludge. Her shoulder was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache where the venom had weakened the muscle. The magnificent charcoal velvet dress was ruined, the hem shredded, the fabric stiff with muck. She reached for a washcloth, her hand trembling. Not from fear this time. From the adrenaline crash. "Leave it," a voice said from the doorway. Elena jumped, spinning around. Alaric stood there. He had showered and changed into a simple linen shirt and trousers, but he looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His skin was paler than usual, almost translucent, and the dark circles under his amber eyes were stark. "I can't leave it," Elena said, her voice cracking. "It stains. If I don't get the muck off the marble now, it'll never come out." Alaric crossed the room in 2 strides. He took the washcloth from her hand and dropped it into the sink. "I do not care about the marble," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "You are bleeding." "I'm fine. It's just a scrape." "Elena." He said her name like a prayer. He reached out, his cool fingers brushing the hair away from her forehead. "You jumped into a pit of void magic. You fought a council lord with a rusted pipe. You are not fine." He turned on the tap, testing the water temperature. "Sit. Please." Elena sat on the edge of the oversized porcelain tub. She watched as the king of vampires, the scourge of the East, knelt on the bath mat. He took a fresh cloth, wet it with warm water, and began to gently wipe the dirt from her arms. The intimacy was overwhelming. It was more terrifying than the battle. "The woman," Elena whispered, watching his hands. "The one in the cloak." She got away. Alaric's hands paused. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "I know. The guards are sweeping the lower levels. But the tunnels beneath the spire are ancient. If she does not want to be found, she will not be found." She called the void magic beautiful. Elena shuddered. She wanted to use Serafina as a battery. Alaric looked up, his eyes burning with a cold, golden fire. "She will not touch her again. I have doubled the wards. I have summoned the shadow guard from the borders. No one enters or leaves the spire without my permission." "And the council?" "The council is terrified," Alaric said grimly, resuming his gentle cleaning of her arm. "They saw Valerius fall. They saw the water main burst. They are currently debating whether I am a hero or a lunatic who let a human destroy the royal plumbing." Elena let out a short, hysterical laugh. "I'm going to get a bill for that pipe, aren't I?" Alaric looked at her. For the first time that night, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. I think we can waive the fee, considering you saved the kingdom. The peace lasted exactly 6 hours. At noon, the summons came. The High Council demanded an emergency session. They cited structural instability and breach of the veil. Elena was in the nursery, watching Serafina sleep, when Corvus appeared at the door. He wants you there, Corvus said. The steward looked more frazzled than usual. His cravat was crooked. Me? Elena whispered. I'm the help, Corvus. I don't go to council meetings. You're the witness, Corvus corrected. And frankly, you are the only one who can verify that Valerius was committing treason and not just having a disagreement with the king. Politics, Mrs. Vance, is a blood sport. And you are currently holding the knife. Elena looked at Serafina. The girl was sleeping soundly, clutching Rex the dinosaur. She looked so small. I need to change, Elena said, standing up. I can't face the council looking like a swamp monster. Corvus nodded. I have taken the liberty of procuring suitable attire. The king insisted. The attire was a suit. It was black silk, tailored to perfection, with a high collar that hid the bruising on her neck. It looked less like a servant's uniform and more like armor. When Elena entered the council chamber, the atmosphere was toxic. The chamber was a circular room dominated by a massive table of obsidian. 12 seats. 11 were filled. Valerius's chair sat empty, a stark reminder of the night's violence. The vampires of the council were ancient beings. Some looked human, others less so. There was Lord Malachi, whose skin was made of cracked gray stone. Lady Isatura, who was surrounded by a cloud of freezing mist. And others, watching Elena with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Alaric sat at the head of the table. He did not stand when she entered, but his eyes locked onto hers, anchoring her. This is highly irregular, Lady Isatura hissed. Her voice sounded like wind blowing through icicles. A human? In the chamber. This human, Alaric said, his voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room, prevented the collapse of the spire. She will speak. Elena took the stand, a small podium in the center of the room. She felt like a defendant in a murder trial. Tell us what you saw, Lord Malachi rumbled. Elena gripped the edges of the podium. I saw Lord Valerius attempting to open a void gate. I saw him place a geometric device on the leyline map. I heard him conspiring with a woman, a spellcaster, to sacrifice Princess Serafina. A woman. Isatura leaned forward. Describe her. She was cloaked, Elena said. Her voice was wet, distorted. She spoke of the old ways. A murmur ran through the room. Impossible, a counselor with eyes like black mirrors muttered. The cold of the deep was eradicated centuries ago. Apparently not, Elena said sharply. Because they were in your basement. Watch your tone, mortal, Malachi growled. Watch yours, Alaric cut in. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. She speaks the truth. And she identified the weakness in the ritual that allowed us to stop it. While you were sipping vintage blood in the ballroom, she was crawling through a ventilation shaft. The point remains, Isatura said, standing up. Mist swirled around her. Valerius is dead. You killed a council member without a trial, Alaric. The ancient pacts are clear. Blood for blood. He was a traitor, Alaric said. He was a peer. Isatura slammed her hand on the table. Ice spread from her palm. If a king can execute a lord based on the word of a human servant, then none of us are safe. We demand a vote of censure. We demand the human be removed from the spire. No, Alaric said. It is the law. Isatura shrieked. I am the law. Alaric roared, standing up. The shadows in the room surged, snuffing out the candles. His eyes glowed like twin suns in the darkness. You want to talk about safety? Valerius compromised the wards. If that gate had opened, you would all be dust. You are alive because of her. The silence was deafening. Then, a slow clapping began. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was not a guard. It was a woman. She was tall, draped in robes of shimmering blue silk. Her hair was white, not like Alaric's silver, but like dead bone. Her eyes were covered by a blindfold of gold cloth. As stirring speech, the woman said. Her voice was melodic, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. "The Oracle," Corvus whispered, his face draining of color. The Oracle of the Spire rarely left her tower. She was the oldest thing in the castle, older than Alaric. "You speak of the cloaked woman," the Oracle said, gliding into the room. She moved without walking, hovering an inch above the floor. "I have seen her in the threads of fate. She is not gone." "Who is she?" Alaric demanded. "She is a mirror," the Oracle said enigmatically. "She is the shadow cast by a light too bright. And she is here." Elena felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the vampires. "She is here." "Where?" Alaric asked, his hand dropping to the sword at his hip. The Oracle turned her blindfolded face toward the table. "Toward Lady Isatura." "Ask the Lady of Mist," the Oracle whispered. Isatura froze. The mist around her stopped swirling. "This is preposterous," Isatura stammered. "I am a High Counselor. I have served the Spire for—" "You have served yourself," the Oracle interrupted. "I see the thread. You provided the access codes. You gave Valerius the map." Alaric turned to Isatura. He didn't scream. He didn't roar. He just looked at her with an expression of profound disappointment. "Isatura," he said softly. "Why?" Isatura's face twisted. The mask of elegance fell away, revealing pure, unadulterated hatred. "Because you are weak," she screamed. "You play house with humans. You let the power of the bloodline dilute. Seraphina is an abomination, a child who cannot control the void. She needs to be harvested, Alaric. Her power could make us gods again." She raised her hands. The mist in the room solidified into jagged spears of ice. "Die, King of Fools." Isatura launched the ice spears. They were aimed at Alaric. But Alaric was fast. He deflected them with a wave of his hand, shattering the ice into snow. But Isatura wasn't aiming for a kill. She was creating a distraction. As the ice exploded, she lunged. Not for the door. For Elena. Elena saw the vampire coming, a blur of blue silk and bared fangs. She tried to dodge, but she was human. She was too slow. Isatura grabbed Elena by the throat, her claws digging in. She dragged Elena back, pressing her against the cold stone wall. "Back!" Isatura shrieked. "Back, or I rip her throat out." The council froze. Alaric froze, his hand outstretched, terror flashing in his eyes. "Isatura," Alaric said, his voice trembling. "Let her go." "Open the gate," Isatura commanded. "Give me the keystone to the void. I will finish what Valerius started." Elena clawed at the hand around her throat. She couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. She looked at Alaric. He looked ready to tear the world apart, but he was helpless. If he moved, she died. "Think, Elena. You're the janitor. You clean up messes." She felt something cold against her back. The wall. But not just the wall. A sconce. A heavy iron torch sconce. Isatura was monologuing, distracted by her own power. "You think you can tame us? We are predators." "We are." Elena reached back. Her fingers wrapped around the loose iron bracket she had noticed and mentally filed a maintenance request for 2 weeks ago. She ripped the heavy iron torch from the wall. And she swung it backward, over her head. Crack. The iron bands hit Isatura square in the face. It wasn't enough to kill a vampire, but it was enough to surprise one. Isatura shrieked, her grip loosening for a fraction of a second. That was all Alaric needed. He moved faster than thought. He was there, a blur of motion. He ripped Elena from Isatura's grasp and threw her behind him. In the same motion, he grabbed Isatura by the throat. He slammed her onto the obsidian table. The stone cracked. "You," Alaric whispered, leaning down until his nose touched hers. "Are fired." He didn't kill her. Not there. Not in front of the council. "Guards," Alaric barked. "Take her to the stasis cells. Deep storage." As the shadow guard dragged the screaming Lady Isatura away, Alaric turned to Elena. She was rubbing her neck, coughing. "Are you?" Alaric started. "I'm fine," Elena wheezed. "But seriously, someone needs to fix that sconce. It's a safety hazard." The council stared at her. The oracle smiled a small, terrifying smile. The threads have shifted, the oracle announced. The king has chosen a queen. Not of blood, but of iron. Alaric looked at the council. He placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. A claim, a protection, a promise. This meeting is adjourned, he said. 2 days later, the atmosphere in the spire had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, tentative respect. The servants bowed to Elena, not because they had to, but because they had heard the story of the Iron Torch. Elena stood in the private gardens Alaric had given her the key to. It was a wild, overgrown place, enclosed by high walls. Dead vines choked the trellises. Weeds strangled the stone paths. It was a mess. And it was perfect. She was on her knees, wearing her old gardening gloves, pulling weeds. It was therapeutic. The simple act of clearing space for something new to grow. You are working again. Alaric stood at the garden gate. He looked different today. Lighter. The weight of the centuries seemed to have lifted slightly. Someone has to, Elena said, tossing a handful of dead nettles onto a pile. This place has good bones. It just needs love. It hasn't had love in a long time, Alaric said, walking over to her. Much like its owner. He sat on the stone bench nearby. He watched her work for a moment in silence. The council has ratified the new laws, he said quietly. Isatura's faction has crumbled. There is peace. For now. That's good, Elena said. Peace is good for property value. Alaric chuckled. It was a genuine sound. Elena. She stopped weeding and looked up. I have been thinking about what you said. About Serafina needing a mother. About me needing to be more than a king. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I do not know how to be a modern man. I do not know how to be a partner to someone like you. I am intense. I am old. I come with baggage that includes assassination attempts and ancient curses. I have a 5-year-old and student loans, Elena said, wiping sweat from her brow. My baggage isn't exactly light either. True. Alaric smiled. But I am willing to learn. If you are willing to teach me. Teach you what? How to live, Alaric said. Not just exist. Live. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. I found this in the vault, he said. It belonged to my grandmother. She was a warrior queen. She reportedly killed a kraken with a harpoon. Elena laughed. Sounds like my kind of woman. Alaric opened the box. Inside was a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of black gold, set with a stone that shifted colors, gray like storm clouds, amber like his eyes. It is not a promise of forever, Alaric said, his voice vulnerable. Forever is a long time, and I know it scares you. It is a promise of today. And tomorrow. And however many tomorrows you will give me. Elena looked at the ring. She looked at the man who had torn apart a kingdom to keep her safe. She looked at the weeds she had cleared, revealing the rich, dark soil beneath. She took off her dirty gardening glove. I think, she said softly, extending her hand, that I can work with that. Alaric slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Now, he said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. I believe Serafina and Leo are attempting to bake cookies in the main kitchen. We should probably go before they burn down the castle. Elena laughed, linking her arm through his. See? You're already getting the hang of this parenting thing. They walked out of the garden together, leaving the gate open behind them.